and welcome to In the Adirondack Library. I'm Grace Alexandrowski, the Public Programs Assistant Manager at the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake. The Adirondack Experience Library is the largest and most comprehensive repository of books, manuscripts, maps, photographs, and government documents related to Adirondack history. Through the series, we invite you inside the library stacks, into the people, places, and spirited conversations that have helped shape life in the North Country. In the Adirondack Library runs from October through May, with gatherings on the first Monday of each month. While this is the last edition before we reopen the Adirondack Experience on May 22nd, you can find recordings and more information about past editions at vadkx.org. We are also delighted to continue our partnership with North Country Public Radio and to welcome back Mitch Teich, station manager at NCPR and host of Northwards. His conversations remind us why the stories of the North Country continue to inspire, challenge, and endure. Tonight, we are especially pleased to welcome distinguished guest Terence Young, who joins us to discuss his book, Heading Out: A History of American Camping. Terence Young is a historical geographer with a long-standing interest in how Americans have experienced nature, earned through years of study and spent thinking deeply about landscapes, travel, and recreation. He earned his PhD in geography at UCLA and later taught at California Polytechnic University, Pomona, where his work explored parks, tourism, and the meanings people attach to outdoor places. Whether writing about city parks or canvas tents, Young brings a storyteller's eyes to the long relationship between people and the outdoors. In Heading Out, Terence reflects on how places like the Adirondacks have helped shape camping as a cherished seasonal ritual. From the rush of Murray's Fools in the late 19th century, to the trails carved out by determined backpackers, to the modern campsites dotted across the park, he explores the enduring appeal of roughing it and what it reveals about Americans' longing for simplicity, freedom, and a temporary step away from everyday life. In addition to Heading Out, you can read more of Terence's work in the New York Archives magazine featured article, Murray's Rush: The Adirondack Beginnings of American Camping. In just a moment, I'll turn things over to Terence to discuss the book. Mitch will then lead tonight's conversation, and afterwards we'll open the floor to your questions. Please submit any questions through the Q&A feature, and keep an eye on the chat for helpful links throughout the evening. For now, settle in and enjoy tonight's conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Grace. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate the invitation. And good evening to everybody out there. I'd like to begin by talking a bit about the book itself, Heading Out. In particular, a question I'm often asked, which is, why did I write this? Why Heading Out? Well, one of the first things is my parents started taking me camping when I was 6 months old. So I have been camping my entire life, and we used to go sometimes as often as once or twice a month when I was a child. So I enjoyed camping a great deal, and I was curious, why? Why camp? Why does anybody camp? That sort of thing. Camping is among the top 10 recreations in the United States. So to me, as a cultural historical person who studies the United States, I'm very curious what is camping? What does it mean to Americans, since so many of us go camping? And so in the end, I just, because I'm interested in meaning, I just wrote a book about why do Americans go camping? Not individually, of course. Why you go and I go might be quite different individually, but rather as a culture. Why do Americans camp? Because Europeans camp, for instance, and it looks the same, but it is not the same experience. So in the book, Heading Out, since camping changed over time, I included several, the chapters are in chronological, more or less, chronological order. So I have a chapter on roughing it before automobiles, when camping was more or less a rather elite activity because you had to have a fair amount of money to do it and to take the time to do it. Then how autos came and completely transformed camping. Probably no technology has had more impact on camping than the automobile. It brought a broader range of Americans to campgrounds, and it created crowding in campsites. There's then a chapter on how to manage that crowding. There's a chapter about the development of the campground, its origins, and the person who developed it, E.P. Meineke. Then I turned to the issue of racial segregation in southern national parks, because amongst the Americans who came camping were African Americans, and this resulted in some issues of racism. Then second to the last chapter is the appearance and use of recreational vehicles like motorhomes, trailers, these sorts of things. And then finally, the arrival of backpacking and long distance trails, like the Pacific Crest Trail, which is what I wrote about in particular. But I skipped one chapter, and that's the first chapter, and that's what I want to talk about today, which is about Adirondack camping, because the Adirondacks is where camping began. So first, let me take you back to 1868, which is just before camping surged in popularity. In summer 1868, the Adirondacks were a pretty quiet place. Perhaps 100 plus people, sportsmen, came to the region to hunt, to fish, and of course they had to camp because there were almost no facilities to camp. But then, one summer later, in 1869, instead of 100 sportsmen, there was at least 1,000 men and women who came to the Adirondacks to camp, to canoe, to fish, these sorts of things. And then the following year, 1870, it doubled or tripled again, up to 2,000 or 3,000 people who came to do the same thing. So these 2 years, 1869, 1870, were rather amazing. I mean, we have a 10 times and 20 times and 30 times increase in number of campers. And this whole thing came to be known as Murray's Rush, or the Murray Rush, like the land rush to Oklahoma, that sort of rush. And it was because of the publication of basically one book, Adventures in the Wilderness by William H. Murray. And let me see here, we're going to share our screen. And let's do this. All right. Here we go. And Adventures in the Wilderness by Murray. This book is still in print, 157 years after it was released, when it's first published. And if you think about it, a lot of books that last 157 years. And the ones that do are usually classics, like Moby Dick or Pride and Prejudice. And I would say to you that this book is also a classic, but it's a regional classic rather than, say, a national classic or an international classic. But nevertheless, so the question is then, who is William Henry Harrison Murray? Well, Murray grew, as we see him here, and he's about 30 in this picture. When Murray grew up in Guilford, Connecticut, he went to and graduated from Yale when it was Yale College. He then went on to theological school and became a Congregationalist minister. Now, in 1869, Murray was quickly moving up through the ranks of the regional Congregationalist church, and he was named the pastor at Park Street Church, Boston's Park Street Church, we see here, when he was 29. So quite a young man to be in charge of this church, which was considered by many to be the premier church of Congregationalists in America. Now, most of his life, Murray had enjoyed outdoor recreation. Growing up, he lived out in the countryside and had really enjoyed going hunting and fishing. And then beginning in 1864, he started going camping and canoeing and hiking in the Adirondacks. And in particular, his favorite spot was Osprey Island on Racket Lake. And we see a picture here from the 1880s where it's called Murray's Island instead of Osprey Island, because by 1880, the Racket Lake and the wilderness and the Adirondacks and Murray had all kind of become melded into a single sort of thought. Anyway, when he went camping up here in the Adirondacks, sometimes he brought along groups of up to 30 people, so quite large camping groups. These would include his wife. They would include his friends and his friends' wives. And he wrote stories. Now, a common thing that pastors are encouraged to do who have to give, sermons is write. Get better. Writing more makes you better at writing. So Murray decided that for whatever reason, he would write about his adventures here in the Adirondacks. So he wrote these stories. He never intended to publish them. He wrote them only for himself. He enjoyed the writing. He enjoyed reading his stories, and they helped him be a better writer. But like I said, no publication was intended. However, he showed the stories to a friend of his who really liked the stories and convinced Murray to put them together for a how-to, or put them together in a book. Murray thought about it. He decided to do so. He took his stories about what happens when you're camping and added to that a chapter about how to camp. This is the first chapter in the book, is how to camp. And then it was published. So it came out, and as we see it here, this is the title page from the original printing, Adventures in the Wilderness or Camp Life in the Adirondacks by William H. Murray, and it was published by Fields, Osgood and Company out of Boston. So the book came out in April 1869, and the reviews came in quite rapidly, and they varied. So in the case, say, of the Overland Monthly, they were not very impressed with Adventures in the Wilderness. And they said things like, well, it's breathless. This is a breathless book. It is a succession of views of insignificant detail. And probably most damning, it is gorgeous French, badly translated. So, despite the Overland Monthly not particularly liking the book, the Nation had a more mixed and somewhat supportive and somewhat questioning sort of review. The Nation said, yes, it's nature, but the how-to camp advice in the book was, quote, sensible and worth taking. So the book had mixed reviews. Well, despite these mixed reviews, Adventures was an immediate bestseller, and it quickly made Murray both famous and rich. So we don't know exactly how many copies of the book were ever sold. That's just not possible to really determine that. But we do know that at its peak, it was selling 500 copies a week. And that by July 1869, and it came out on April 1st, so three and a half months later, it was in its 10th printing by a Fields, Osgood and Company. So this book, as I mentioned to you, prompted what was called the Murray Rush. Just a horde of hunters and anglers and campers came from New York, from Boston, from Hartford, from all sorts of places in the region. And the summers of 1869, 1870 became known as the Murray Rush. Now, I want to show you some images here that are, let me see if I can move this. There we go. There are some images here from Harper's New Monthly magazine from August of 1870, the second year of the rush. The article was really a kind of lampooning of Murray and the rush, but it's lampooned, I think, with a lot of love. It's really not vicious, but it really does make fun of the whole thing. And whoever illustrated this, as I'll show you, they knew what's going on. They'd read Murray's book, and they had some idea how people were acting. Maybe they went themselves, I don't know. But this is one of the illustrations from that story, and I'm going to show it to you a number of times, making some points about it. So anyway, first we start with, you'll notice this. The man in the lead at the very beginning is holding a book which he's reading as he walks onto the ship on the left. Well, that's Adventures in the Wilderness. And all of these people are following the book into the wilds. So the story is off we go, and there are crowds of people to come along. Now, Murray suggested a route. He said you should start in Whitehall at the south end of Lake Champlain, as we see here on the map. And then you should get off the train to Whitehall and go and get onto the boat and head north on Lake Champlain. And I take us back to the picture we were just looking at. You'll notice there's the train in the background. We're at Whitehall. Everybody has come off the train and they are headed onto the ship here and going to head north up the lake to their destination, where they're going to get off and head further into the Adirondacks, or head into the Adirondacks. So Murray suggested you take the boat to Plattsburgh, up the lake here. We see it circled there at the top of the map. When you get to Plattsburgh, you took a coach or a train. Initially, there was just the coach, but by 1875, there was a train going, and you went down to Port Kent, as I note here on the map. Now, once you got to Port Kent, you had to head inland towards Oswald Chasm, Roger Station, North Elba, these sorts of places, and you had to do it either on a horse, or you could walk, I suppose, or on horseback, or on a wagon drawn by a horse, which was Murray's suggestion. Well, again, we go back to this article lampooning the sort of experience here, and we see two women here on the left who are well dressed, and their dog has a coat on itself, and they are being offered a ride in a kind of, very simple carriage, if you will, here. And you can see there's a kind of omnibus heading off in the distance there, and he's the driver, owner of this ride, is offering them a ride. And one of the women says, "Have you no voiture, no barouche?" Well, if you're like me, when you first do this, you're like, what's a voiture? What's a barouche? I had no idea. So I had to go and investigate what this is. Now, maybe some of you knew, but this is a barouche. And a barouche was a nice carriage, horse-drawn carriage, with an awning and this sort of thing. So the woman is asking for something like this, and no such thing is available at this point in the rush. So once you headed up the trail, up the road towards the Adirondacks, your destination at the end, Murray suggested, was Saranac Lake. Saranac Lake is where you jumped off into the wilderness. And when you got there, you stayed at Martin's Hotel on Saranac. Here it is in 1865, a rather substantial place in 1865, but still very little besides Martin's Hotel at the time. And from here, you canoed. One got a canoe and a guide, and you canoed and portaged into the wilds to stay in cabins, tents, and what were known as Adirondack shelters or lean-tos. And here we can see an illustration, again, from the 1870s, a different book. Four men sitting at a table, eating, their guide, I presume, on the left there, cooking something. And if you look around at the objects in the picture, you'll notice under the lean-to that there are pans hanging on the wall and large jugs underneath them. And the cook or guide is cooking with a pot. And the men have an axe next to them, next to that gun to the right of them. I point this out because I want you to understand that when camping began, there is no camping equipment. as we would think of it. It's just everyday stuff. It's pans on the wall, probably weighed multiple pounds. And things like that. All this stuff is very heavy, very large, very bulky, doesn't nest. And think about that when you compare that to a down sleeping bag, air mattresses, self-erecting tents, all this sort of stuff. None of that is available at the beginning of Adirondack camping. Well, no surprise, when 1,000 people show up where 100 used to, there was a severe shortage of watercraft and guides. And this, of course, as I'll mention, led to some complaints. So, the question is, why was Adventures in the Wilderness so popular? Well, several reasons, I think. Murray said cities are dispiriting and unhealthy places. So you should head out of them and into nature, which he described as uplifting, healthy, God's handiwork, if you will. And this is where the title of my book comes from, Heading Out, because I think it's fair to say that camping is as much about heading out of cities as it is about going into nature. So then, like now, in 1869, like today, lots of urban Americans disliked city life. And Murray, in effect, gave them permission to go ahead and retreat into nature. Another is camping. He's the first person to say that camping alone is a recreation. Now, there have been people, of course, camping is ancient, but there have been people going into the Adirondacks before 1869 for recreation, but they basically went for hunting and fishing, things like that. They camped, of course, but that camping was an adjunct to what they were doing. Murray's the first person to tell people you don't have to hunt and fish. Camping itself is a form of recreation. It is a worthy thing and a relaxing thing in and of itself. So I think that's another reason why Adventures is so popular. A third reason is the book is the first practical guide to camping. Earlier books about going into the Adirondacks really never tell you how to do that, how to get there, what to do. Murray was very clear. Not only did he tell you where to camp, but he told you how to camp, including what to bring, and perhaps even more importantly, what not to bring. Don't over prepare, which is a common thing amongst campers. First time campers, they take too much. Uh, and then I'd say finally, one thing about Murray's book is now the people who are going camping at this time and are taking up Murray's recommendation is they're largely low white and middle to upper middle class. So Murray, and they have to be relatively well off because they have to be able to afford to take the train ride, ride on the boat, rent a guide, rent a canoe, all of this stuff, and take the time off of them. So Murray doesn't really break any barriers there in terms of class or ethnicity, but he does break gender barriers. Murray specifically encouraged women to camp, telling them that they would definitely benefit from it. More practically, the book included the components of what Murray described as a, quote, ladies' outfit, unquote. He said, bring gloves with armlets, which I take to be sleeves that would go up to like your elbows, a felt hat, a flannel chain, waterproof footwear, and something, again, I had to investigate because I didn't know what this was Turkish drawers, or what are probably more commonly known now as bloomers. So here we see a picture of a woman from an advertisement selling them from about 1865. And this is the outfit with these leggings and the skirt that Murray is suggesting. And I take it back to that picture I have started with because I want you to notice the woman here in the front of this, she is wearing Turkish drawers. She's got bloomers on as well. So that somebody is paying attention here. let's see. So the reactions to the Murray rush were both positive and negative. For example, one reporter said camping, Adirondack camping, encouraged the good fellowship that Murray said it did. The people who got there, the new backwoods acquaintances, would quickly begin to talk to each other, interact with each other, and that he said the talk quickly turned to, quote, the four great subjects of the Adirondacks: game, Murray, guides, and mosquitoes, unquote. At the same time, others made fun of Murray's claim, especially concerning health. Murray had said, fresh air, you get some exercise, good for you, make you feel better, clear your head, these sorts of things you and I have heard as well. But some people heard him saying, even though he didn't say this, that this could cure things, cure diseases and stuff like that. So I, again, take you back to our image that I've been going through, and you'll see here I've circled, there's a man in a stretcher who is ill and is being carried into the wilderness for his health to seek a cure, if you will. And another image from this same article, lampooning this, is a before and after, right? On the left, we have before. This man, very thin, looks like he might have consumption, tuberculosis. He's got his fishing pole. He can't even quite stand up straight. He's so weak. His knees are bent. But after a while in the Adirondacks on the right, well, heck, he's fleshed out, so much so that his whatever vest is, the buttons are popping. He's got a handful of fish. His boots seem to have gotten larger even as well. Now, Murray never claimed that the Adirondacks were going to cure you of tuberculosis or anything like that. But it's become associated, this idea. And for those of you who don't know, and for those who do, just let me remind you, the person with whom this should be associated is Dr. Edward Trudeau, who opened his sanitarium on Saranac Lake in 1885, which is long after the period we're talking about. So anyway, other critics were upset by the conditions. In particular, as I said, they got there and there was a shortage of canoes, there was a shortage of guides, there was a shortage of places to stay, these sort of things. Still others were upset by what they considered the inauthentic campers, if you will. And this was especially one particular critic was Thomas Bang Thorpe, who we see here on the left. He was a widely known author, painter, and illustrator. And in an article he wrote called Abuses of the Backwoods, he referred to adventures in the wilderness as fashionable twaddle, that is pretty much useless and not real. And he referred to the new campers who were showing up as pretenders and superficials. He did not appreciate them coming. He thought this was a place where you should be, understand the woods, you should have lots of experience, you should have more or less a lot of money. So, but one criticism amongst all of the criticisms stood out, and that was there were women campers. Well, this was one woman who pushed back against this particular criticism was Kate Field. We see Kate here in 1868, I believe it's the date on this picture. Kate Field was a renowned journalist, travel writer, actor, and lecturer. She wrote for newspapers in New York in particular, but in several in the United States. She traveled to England to write stories from England back to newspapers in the United States. As I said, she performed on the stage. She was a very popular lecturer on the stage. So she had read Adventures in the Wilderness in spring of 1869 when it first came out. And in July, she went camping with 3 female friends. No men came on their particular trip. And they called themselves, probably appropriately, the Black Fly Club. Now, they went on a serious camping trip. This is a couple of blocks from Martin's Hotel. They traveled 80 miles by canoe and portage into the wildlands beyond Saranac Lake. So they had a serious experience of the Adirondacks. And afterwards, she praised the equality and the openness that camping promoted. In August 69, in an article, she wrote, quote, "The greatest good of the greatest number is the democratic platform. And if several hundred men think that the North Woods was instituted for their benefit, they are sadly mistaken," unquote. In fall 1869, a couple of months later, he took to the public lecture stage to praise the Adirondacks and to argue that women should camp. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with public lectures in the mid-19th century, they're sort of the equivalent of film documentaries or podcasts and social media in general. This is one of the places outside of newspapers and just talking to each other that people learn things about what was really going on in the world, about art and other sort of activities and cutting edge sort of things. And when Field went to give her first lecture, she went to Steinway Hall in New York. Now, if you're not familiar, this is Steinway Hall, the white building there with the flag and the sign that says pianos, because it is that Steinway. And this is the interior of Steinway Hall. Now, I don't know how many seats are in this hall, but I mean, we're pushing 1,000, right? And she would fill this. So she was seriously respected and admired, and people wanted to hear what Kate Field had to say. So here's one of the things he said, and this is recorded by a newspaperman who was there and put it in an article. He said, "It was agreeable to women to be accompanied on such excursions by the tyrant man, but when there was no such tyrant at hand to rescue her, it is surprising what powers of rescue she finds within herself," unquote. The Adirondack scenery, she continued, was grand. The local men were, quote, "unmitigated rough," unquote, and that mosquitoes were, quote, "like the poor, always with you," unquote. Nevertheless, she also admitted that, quote, "the flapjacks eaten with maple syrup made up for all the inconveniences," unquote. Unsurprisingly, Field's publications and lectures about camping particularly rankled our old friend, T.B. Thorpe, who in an article wrote about women camping, "The wild woods are not a place for fashionable ladies of the American style. They have nothing in their education that makes such places appreciated. Let the ladies keep out of the woods, even such male ladies as admire Mr. Murray's book." Well, Field had a much bigger spirit than Thorpe, and she simply, Banks, Thorpe, and she simply ignored Thorpe and continued to promote camping, which led to a small but notable increase in the number of women campers in the Adirondacks in the summer of 1870 and beyond. So, despite the critics, despite things people said, by 1872, Adventures in the Wilderness had made its mark. The number of campers in the Adirondacks was increasing rapidly and will continue to do so, and other destinations began to draw campers in the same style. And very soon, in a matter of a decade or two, there are campers across the country going as far as Yellowstone. And anyway, as it turned out, people no longer needed to be convinced that they should go camping. After Adventures in the Wilderness, what they mostly would want was simply to know where and how. And that's my story. And thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Terence Young. And I am pleased to say that that your book is not just fashionable twaddle.
Thank you.
So the way the rest of this hour is going to work for people who are just joining us for the first time in the Adirondack Library series, if you have questions, please feel free to share them at any time in the Q&A. We'll get to them as quickly as we can. I have lots of things I can ask, but we want to make this as interactive an experience as possible. So, and I know we have lots of people who have tuned in for this, and presumably lots of people who have just as strong a love for camping as yours. And I wanted to start there actually, because you said you've been camping since you were 6 months old. Presumably, you did not have a lot of say in the matter when you were an infant. Um, but how would you compare your own love for camping as an adult with what Murray and others in the 1870s were looking for? What is it that you get out of this that makes it so interesting to you?
Oh, I feel much the same way Murray did. I think in that, yeah, I mean, I have to live in the city. This is where the jobs are, right? This is where the money is. But it doesn't. I'm an American. I think I'm like lots of Americans. Cities are like, yeah, okay, but I'd rather not, if I could. And camping was a periodic release, and I grew up in California, so we went to the national parks and state parks quite a bit. And yeah, I enjoyed it and still do.
Well, and as we learned from reading, I think it's actually in the introduction to your book, you weren't necessarily hiking, dozens of miles in the wilderness. You were looking for spaces that were removed from people, but not necessarily removed from your ability to drive to them.
That's right. Yeah, most of the camping I've ever done, which is what my parents did, was car camping, right? So take tent along and whatever stove and that sort of thing. And yeah, my wife and I, one of the things we found we really enjoyed was trying to find a place you could drive in. You might need a four-wheel vehicle, but you could drive in and set up your tent, and there wouldn't be a great crowd. So I don't know, since I was maybe 40 or so, I have preferred to not go to national parks only because not I love visiting them, but I'd rather not stay in the campgrounds because they're crowded. Many of them, they're very close together. They have small campsites. So
As where you left off in your presentation,
yeah.
we kind of gather that Murray's writing about the Adirondacks really kind of spurred a broader national movement. Was it the book itself that got people thinking, okay, I don't live near the Adirondacks, but I can do this in my area, or did it inspire other writers to do the same thing in their regions, or a little of both?
I would say mostly it was the latter. Public writers very quickly. There's a book much like Murray's that comes out in 1870 or 71, so it's very quick, and it's more or less like Murray's book. But by 1872, they no longer have this kind of why you should go camping as much as it's it splits into two. It's either here's where you can go camping,
Hmm.
and here's how you can go camping. And then no, people don't really write anymore about why you should go camping. I think Murray's story, which he repeated, he gave public lectures too. He admitted he probably gave 15,000 public lectures. He said those he traveled a lot. And I'm sure he told many, many people who didn't go camping in the Adirondacks, they instead went to, somewhere on Lake Michigan or whatever. So,
So we've already had a number of questions that people are asking, and I want to get to one that I was curious about as you were speaking. We had an anonymous attendee who would like to know what were the items that Murray suggested to bring, and maybe more interestingly, suggested not to bring camping in the 1860s and 70s.
well, in the very beginning, since he is sending you to Saranac Lake to Martin, he's mostly concerned, and he's expecting that there'll be a canoe there. There'll be guides. Those people, the guides will have the heavy equipment, tans and places to stay and stuff like that. So he's not telling you bring a Coleman stove or your pumpkins or something like that. Mostly, what he is focusing on is any special foods you might like, okay, that you happen to particularly like, and keep in mind that they can be, you're going to be out in the woods, so you can't bake a cake, right? Something like that. And then the other is he's very much again on bringing if you like to fish, bring your lures. You know, bring your what if you have a special line, a special pole you like. And in the picture I showed you, we're showing everybody. People have poles, right? They're bringing their own poles and things. And if you like to hunt, bring your gun, obviously. And again, we saw that. And then lastly, it's clothes. He's giving you an outfit like he did for women, describing an outfit. Mostly what he says is don't overpack. Don't bring, 7 outfits. You're not going to a hotel in New York City for a week, or something. You bring 1 or 2 and that's it. You know, bring just what the minimum and stick with that. You're not going to need all those other things. So.
I should note one of the things that was really, and I think this again goes back to your introduction. You have been bringing a lantern that has been part of your camping experience for years and
Yeah.
years and years, right?
That's right. It's a Coleman lantern that my parents purchased before I was born. They bought it in 1948. I've checked. You can check and find out when your Coleman lantern was manufactured. And yeah, and it still works just fine.
Yeah.
I've had to put new leather in it, and of course you have to put new mantles on it periodically. But yeah, it still works, still cranking out great light.
Yeah. Lots of questions from people who have joined us this evening. One from Earl, who is curious, I think, in a general sense, where do the Boy and Girl Scout movements fit in with the history of camping in this country?
They come in actually quite a bit later. We're talking in the 1880s and 90s. So, I think it's not my specialty, uh, but I think the Boy Scouts start first. Um, and Lord Baden-Powell starts them in England, and then they come to America, and I don't remember exactly when, but call it a generation later, basically. The people who are going camping in Murray's era, they're going to start sending their kids to do these kinds of things. So that it's that next generation that's probably the big people who quickly say, Girl Scouting or Campfire Girls or Boy Scouts, and there were lots of these kinds of organizations.
Jim asks, what did Murray say about black flies? And I would expand that to mosquitoes and other insects as well, because I know that is something that comes up in a discussion, both from Murray's standpoint and from what some of his critics said.
Yeah, Murray admitted, okay, if you go early in the season, you better expect black flies. But if you go later in the season, they're not really a problem. And that people who went, he was sort of, if you look at the letters, people complaining, they're the people who got there very early, right at the beginning of the season when it's just getting nice and stuff, and there's still plenty of moisture everywhere. But he said, if you can't stand the black flies, wait a little while. So.
I feel like there was one reviewer that you quote who said, "Well, either the black flies didn't read Murray's book, or they were around longer than expected in that particular year."
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know better than I. It's a seasonal thing. They come,
they
they go.
they do what they do.
Yeah.
Eric asks a pretty intriguing question. He would like to know, do you think camping is actually a civilizing experience?
That's an interesting comment. I would say it is. I would say it goes with civilization, in that it is really tied to urban life, more complex, industrialized, urbanized living. Prior to urbanization being a big issue in America, there's very few people who are heading out to camp and stuff. I think you have to get to a point where the cities are big enough that people can't just easily walk out of them. in the colonial era, a big city is 2 miles across, which you can walk in half an hour, right? Um, by 1860s, of course, New York and Boston, they're much larger than that. And so finally people are getting cut off. But we should never underestimate how being cut off is just plain being cut off from nature. People in the 19th century aren't closer to nature. The ones who live in New York or Boston, they're just as isolated from it as you and I might be living in New York or Boston now. Once you're beyond the edge of the natural world and you're in an urban setting, you're in an urban setting. And that's what people dealt with. They didn't know what camping was about. So they might have urges to go. They might think it'd be great to get out of town. But Murray's finally the one who tells them, yes, you should get out of town. But there's a good reason to get out of town. And here's how. So I think it's certainly tied with civilization, but I'm not sure it is civilizing or something like that.
Is there some impact that Murray has on efforts to bring more nature into large cities? Civic movements like Central Park and other planned bits of nature that, for example, Frederick Law Olmsted was so instrumental in directing in cities like New York and Boston and others.
I think that's an interesting question. It's a good question. Um, I have never found any direct connection, but you're right. I mean, Central Park is 1858. Uh, Yosemite, the first state and national park, is 1864. Yellowstone is going to be a national park 3 years after this book in 1872. I think Murray is part of a larger movement of getting to nature, back to nature. Uh, and what he's offering in a way is a way to get into the real thing as opposed to
Right,
something nearby that's a kind of, whatever, simulation of.
right. Where does John Brown's gravesite fall in this discussion? This was another part of the path that Murray suggested people should take as they get into the Adirondacks.
Yeah. He encouraged people to, as they would take that ride into Saranac Lake, to stop and to visit the grave of, I can't remember his exact term, but it's, like visit the grave of the sainted hero of the Union. He very much was, yes, this man is extremely special and we should all visit him. You know.
In a way, that was much more along the lines of doing. You hate to use the term touristy, but I mean it was not part of the wilderness, but it was a pilgrimage in the with the lowercase p that you describe as being kind of central to the idea of going to nature. This was another kind of pilgrimage.
That's right. I think he's I have to think he probably stopped there many times, would be my guess. Uh, and because he never said it. But I also think, yes, it's part of that larger, uh, uh, why, how are we Americans? Why are we Americans? And Brown's grave certainly ties into that. It's 1869, right? Civil War is only 4 years old. And there are many, 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 many veterans and families of veterans and stuff at this time. So,
Yeah. Carol would like to know how could the women go camping in the wilderness without a guide?
oh, well, I'm not sure they did go without a guide. Field and her friends. She never said, but at the same time, there was a shortage of guides. It became the number of guides. I mean, we're talking, you can count them on your two hands of people who were real guides. And uh, those people were quickly hired. And if you weren't there at just the right moment, you might find yourself being told, well, this guy whose father runs a grocery or something, he could take you out, and you might just think, no, no, thanks. It's a very good question. And I hadn't actually thought about it previously, but probably, yeah, she probably did have some guide, someone, but I don't know who. She went in canoes. She didn't bring those, that's for sure.
Wow. Uh, A question from Anthony who asks, and maybe you'll know this answer and maybe not. How does Murray influence George Washington Sears' Nessmuk writing in any way?
Well, they're contemporary, and I have not come across anything that suggests the writing of either has any direct influence on the other. So I simply don't know.
Yeah.
But they must have known of each other, certainly.
And along these lines, Mark wants to know, do you know what John Muir, who would have been a contemporary of Murray's, thought of Murray's approach, and if you had any idea what Murray might have thought of Muir?
I can tell you Murray never mentions Muir in anything I've come across. Um, and boy, Muir, I, I want to say Muir doesn't show up in California until like 5 years or 7 or something years after the Adventures in the Wilderness comes out. And I don't know if his route, across America took him anywhere near the Adirondacks. Again, I just details I simply don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're not playing Stump the Author tonight, but people are curious. Do you know, and this is a question from Jim, whether Murray died for his first trips into the Adirondacks?
Sorry, can you repeat that? You froze for a moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, did Murray himself have a guide for his initial trips into the Adirondacks?
Yeah, he did. And he named several people in the book. As I think I mentioned, he told you not only, well, or maybe I didn't in this call, but he did tell you how to camp and he told you who to approach as the best guide to the Adirondacks, which were from his own experience.
Fame and fortune, I gather, for Murray were somewhat fleeting. He kind of disappeared off the national map for a while. Not too many years after publication.
Yes, apparently, the wealth went to his head. Um, his marriage fell apart. He ran through all his money and he lost his position in the Park Street Church all within about a year of each other, which is like, I can't remember exactly how many years later, 5, 6, 7 after this. He loved horses. Not just, I don't know if he bet on them, but he loved owning them and he bought a lot of horses. And anyway, yeah, he was broke. He tried a variety of things. He disappeared. We have no record of what he did for like 10 years. He just kind of fell off the map, didn't write anything, didn't tell anyone, and then came back and started writing stories in books, other books. So Adirondack Murray has a number of books besides Adventures in the Wilderness, which made him enough money to be able to buy his childhood home in Guilford, which he lived in with his family for the last, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years of his life. And he died there when he was like late 60s or something like that in age. So, yeah, yeah, tough life in a way.
But his seminal work is still in print.
Absolutely.
What do you think we might get out of reading Murray's book today?
Oh, I think the camping advice is certainly dated as to how to camp and stuff, and who you're going to ask to help and things like that. Stories, a lot of the stories hold up very well. Murray was Murray's in that same kind of category with people like Mark Twain,
Mhm.
who are very self-deprecating, who lead you down a path for a while, which seems serious, but then you discover that in fact your leg's being pulled, and he's not really serious about this. And as the publisher said at the time, Fields Osgood Company, they said, we've never published anything like this. Now, I think today we would take it as like, well, I get it. It's not unusual, but you have to go and try to read a book from 1866 or something that is stories about nature or something like that, and they're just oh, they're dull. So yeah, it's a good book. I've read it. I encourage people to read it. The bookstore sells it there at the Experience because it's a good seller. It's a good book.
Well, and they sell this book as well, which is also a good book.
Oh,
Terence
thanks.
Young, thank you so much, and I'll turn things back over to Grace at the Adirondack Experience.
Hey, thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed tonight's conversation as much as we did, and we extend our sincerest thanks to Terence Young and Mitch Teich for such an engaging and thoughtful discussion. As we look ahead to the summer season here in the Adirondacks, we invite you to join us as we open for the season on Friday, May 22nd. We will be open for 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. If you would like to if you would like to connect with us in person before we open, we would love to see you on Thursday, May 14th from 6 to 8 p.m. for taps and trivia at Timber and Time at the station in Ski Bowl Park, North Creek. For this special edition, we will be partnering with the 125th anniversary of Theodore Roosevelt's Night Rides the Presidency Committee. Trivia categories will highlight Adirondack themes with questions inspired by Roosevelt's life, legacy, and pursuits, including his deep connection to the region. We also invite you to join us for our first workshop of the season on Sunday, June 6th, Crafting Natural Bug Repellents with 80K Fragrance Farm. Participants will learn how to craft their own all-natural bug repellents and bug bite soother using essential oils, perfect for keeping pests at bay and soothing itchy bites during Adirondack summers. There is so much ahead this spring and summer, and we encourage you to visit theadkx.org for the full schedule of programs and events. On behalf of us all at the Adirondack Experience, I'm Grace Alexandrowski. Thank you for spending your evening with us. From Blue Mountain Lake to wherever you may be watching, we wish you a very good night, and until next time.